and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having yet to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So this is our, it's actually our second evening, but our first evening to meet and talk and have some consideration about practice and what we are doing. And so here it is, a fairly cool day it has been. Weeks ago, we had such warm weather and suddenly we were feeling chilly when it's 70 degrees. And tomorrow is going to be the same, maybe with not very much sun at all. You'll see sun on Saturday. So we have this practice of this creativity, this time in our Sesshin. And for me, I consider it to be an important aspect of practice. May not be true for all teachers, but after 50 years of practice, I feel from the beginning of practice, I felt that having some artistic expression was very important in practice and in life. Art is the first example we have from human beings on this planet. The cave drawings, magnificent pieces of art, are there for us to feel the resonance of those lives. And art will still be here long after we are gone. So it seems to me it has a much greater longevity than any of us in any of our lives. But we do it, when it's combined with practice, when an art practice is combined with Zen practice, it enhances practice entirely. It gives us something, an expression that allows us to say our understanding, our experience of awakening, which is a difficult thing to do. I know that we say, okay, everything is practice, and it's true. And that's the case, but we sort of say it, but then what is that statement? What is that expression? All of the arts of Japan, without fail, rise out of Zen practice. Without fail, every single art. Pottery, painting, shodo, flowers, gardening, every art comes out of Zen practice and Zen training. So when I encourage students to take up an art, it's a little bit like hanging out in the first of the ox herding pictures for a very long time. Such resistance. People just don't believe me that taking up an art will so enhance their lives, will give them such richness that they just can't imagine. And, it's taking up an art is something exactly like practice in that it's never going to be perfect. It's not about perfection. It's not about sales. It's not about becoming somebody great. It's not about fame. It's not about anything like that. But somehow I think we imagine that taking up an art has those undercurrents, and we just think, oh, that's not for us. Or maybe we take it up and we do have those things in mind, and we give it up very quickly because we discovered that we're just not a great artist and we're not going to make any money at it. And so all of those things maybe have some implication for us. But being able to say something is pretty important around awakening. And my friend Jean Lohman, who died a number of years ago, Olympia poet, a Quaker poet, she and I taught various workshops together. And Jean said, and she and I agreed, that whatever subject you are writing when you are writing a poem, it doesn't matter, because the act of writing the poem is the spiritual act. So you can be writing about peanut butter, but the act of engaging in the poem is the expression of awakening. So this is some little tiny workshop we are doing in the summer, once a year. Twice a year, I ask you to do some piece of art. I ask you to write a poem in January, and then in July, we engage in something like this. Not very much, not so much. But it behooves you to find an art in your life and follow it and see where it leads and see how it opens you and engages you in something deeper. So we are on the first couple of ox herding pictures. We are just finding practice, just coming to practice. It feels like that at a sesshin. You know, we come into the sesshin and it is the push-pull, it's the holding on to the rope and tug of war. Are we going to survive sesshin? Even if it's not so difficult one, am I ready to embrace the sesshin? Am I ready to be in that for those days and just do whatever is asked of me and just follow the schedule in faith, to take it in faith and follow the schedule? So we have that kind of sense about sesshin, pretty much without fail. People have at least some level of that in coming to sesshin. And even this morning, at 5:30 this morning, are we going to survive the day? Will we get through starting at such an early hour? Will we be able to do it? And here we are at 7 o'clock tonight, and we seem to be okay, and we seem to have gotten through nicely, done some interesting things, and eaten delicious food, and we're all still vertical. So there's that initial confidence in our own selves in coming to sesshin, which is this push-pull of the ox. The, will I survive, but I'm going to do it. Okay, will I make it? My car is out in the parking lot, and if it's too bad, I can always go into my car and drive away. There's always that. There's always that possibility. But somehow we stay and we stick. And it's all right. It gets to be all right. And as we go along, there are inklings that we feel within ourselves, inklings of some self-examination, some self that we are feeling that may have some angst or may have some difficulties at this time. And we feel that, and sitting somehow helps us to understand that maybe we can work that out. Maybe we can see into it. Maybe we can come to terms with ourselves in some way. I know in the ox herding pictures, as we've taken up for this Sesshin, most of us, for most of our lives, are somewhere in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that. There was one priest that I was with for some time. He was, leader of his own temple, very small temple in northern Japan. And every once in a while, he would say something to me and expect a return of some kind. And then he'd say, "Oh yeah, you're at number 4." Something like that. Something like that, Say, okay. I mean, what am I going to do about that? Okay. So, that's all right. And I think it was the ox herding pictures. I can't remember. It was something like that I would be rated on this scale of something by whatever question he'd ask me, I'd answer quickly, and that would be that. Oh, I can't say that I ever really worried about it. It was at that moment, how can we say about any of us? So somebody can say, yeah, okay, I'm at 4, but that's at this moment. In any moment, anything can happen in one's life. Any expression can take place. So we can't compart people into these segments and say, oh, that's where you are. At this moment, perhaps. And then 10 minutes later, you hear a bird and everything changes. So we can't see ourselves this way either. And as I said also this morning, that we cannot, when we look at the creative process or we look at our own expression, we cannot evaluate it. And we cannot scrutinize the creative process. We cannot analyze it. It's wrong to do so. It's simply the unfolding of some very deep matters within that are moving in a particular way with the gut and the heart and the imagination and the intellect, and all of these are swirling around together in some brilliant happening, because the human design is so miraculous. So to analyze it is to render it mute in some way. We can only abandon ourselves to the expression. Remember a time also in traveling, I was traveling with a friend, another teacher, and I was at the university at the time. And so we went to a temple way in the south of Kyoto, down along the Kii Peninsula. And at the bottom of that peninsula, it's called like the Greek Isles of Japan. It's exquisite beach with white sand and brilliant blue ocean and so forth and so on. So we were staying at this temple, and there was a drum there, a taiko drum. So I asked if it was okay if I played the taiko. I'm the biggest, I don't know how to play the taiko. I just thought it's what I had wanted to study when I went to Japan. I wanted to learn to play the taiko. I wanted to take that as my art. I decided that as long as I was going to be in Japan, I was going to study one art. And I wanted to do taiko more than anything. But taikos are very expensive, and you have to carry them to your rehearsal, and it wasn't going to work. It just was not going to work. They're very, very expensive. And where would I practice? I mean, in my apartment, it would not have been possible. The people would not have appreciated it. But anyway, he said, sure, you can play the taiko. Well, I just started roaring with this taiko, just bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, da, 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 da. And after about 5 minutes, this priest came out and he said, what are you doing? But it was just so glorious to have that expression at that moment. It was so great. Not knowing how to do anything, you just do it. It was my first time to even touch the taiko. And so knowing nothing, you do something. And so many of us have been educated out of the creative process. So many of us have been educated in such a way that we are terrified to engage because we've been criticized for our performance in most art that we have taken up. So there's that critic sitting on one's shoulder that we have to allow ourselves to let go of, in the same way that we must let go of the critic of practice. We must let go of the idea that, oh, my Zazen is not so good. I'm really not a very good Zen practitioner. I'm still, thoughts are in my mind during Zazen, so I can't be very good. All of this is nonsense. We simply embrace Zazen. That's it. We just embrace Zazen. No more worry about it. No more thinking. No more concern of whether it's correct or not. Simply embrace it. Same way as we embrace a poem. We embrace the poetic mind, and we allow the gods to speak. We allow intuition and imagination to come to the fore without resistance. And whatever art it is that we take up, that's how we do. That's how we do it. So earlier I said, just be like a child. So to be like a child in Zazen, in practice, a beginner, and also in any expression of art, or any expression, cooking, whatever we do. We just embrace it. So maybe you have some questions you want to bring up about anything that we practiced today. The first day is the hardest. It's always a little bit difficult. So maybe you've got a question of some kind. Same with folks on Zoom. If you've got a question, please shout out. Yes, Bob. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking back, this is Bob Witzel.
Speak well enough so everyone can hear.
I was thinking back over the ox herding pictures, and I understand that they show very, for lack of a better word, benchmarks in practice.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, they could also, I guess my question is, where is the teacher in that scenario? To someone not familiar with Zen, if they were to come upon those, there's no teacher and that's a critical, to me, it's a critical aspect of practice.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding the intent of the ox herding pictures.
Practice is the teacher. Practice is the same for the teacher or for the student. It's exactly the same between us.
Mm-hmm.
There's no separation in our practice. We're doing the same practice. So the function of the teacher is to hold the mirror. That's all. And the function of the student is to learn to be the teacher of oneself. And to see that. And the function of the teacher is to also be a student and not to forget to be a student. And ultimately, these merge. The student and the teacher become one in practice. So you know that you are your own teacher in the kitchen, which is a very strong place of practice. You are your own teacher and you are your own student in the kitchen. And it's the same on the cushion. You're constantly teaching yourself about the nature of food, which is the sustenance. We could do a whole sesshin without the teacher. We could not do a whole sesshin without you, without the cook. Mm-hmm. It would be impossible. We'd be fainting. So you are constantly learning the measurement and the balance of food and nutrition and all of those things together. And so that is the teacher. That doing that is the teacher itself. That practice is the teacher.
The teacher is the doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, at the same time, we don't have God. Buddhism doesn't do God. Buddhism doesn't necessarily deny God. It's just that the teaching in Buddhism is that we are here in this visible realm, this visible life, and that is what our focus is. So at the same time, we have a visible teacher, because without that, we become arrogant. Without the visible teacher, I have a teacher, my teacher has a teacher. You always have a teacher, a visible teacher. And so it isn't that teacher is God. I'm not meaning that at all. But there is someone we look to hold that line for us when we are flopping and weeping and unruly and all of those other things. When our own psyche is adrift, we have a person we call on to be able to help us balance. But the teacher's not a God, but at the same time, the teacher stands in that position to help us get there. Brian.
Yeah.
This is Brian speaking.
Yes. As I was listening to you speak earlier, especially, I don't know for whatever reason, when you were speaking to Bob about cooking the food, what came to mind for me was it's almost as if you're speaking of like a playfulness. I mean, the beginner mind or play is just like doing something for the sake of doing something, right? Just for the sheer joy of experiencing it and just being with it. And particularly in art, for me, you know,
Are you able to hear? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
You know, I think that there's such value judgment put on creative expression starting at a very early age. I mean,
Yes.
Judgments happen, and soon people are not. You know, it's like we're being taught not to be playful.
Quite right.
I take everything so seriously.
Quite right.
It's like I don't know where there's a question here, but it's like how can we cultivate that when we're our own worst critics? And you know, I've recently retaken up some creative expression, and I judge my work. And it's almost impossible not to. I try not to. I try to just enjoy the process, and you know, so it's really. I think for me, when I step away from something I've created and happen to come back to it and look at it and say, oh, wow, I feel something. Or
Yeah.
there's something there that I couldn't feel or experience when I created it, because there's this this value separation. I don't know, how do we work with that? Or how do we?
No, that's something that every artist works with. So there are a couple of ways to work with art. One is to do it without thinking about the outcome of it. And then there's the part where you do wish to turn it into art. So not everything that we do creatively is art. It is therapeutic, and maybe it's artsy, but it's not necessarily art. And then there's the wish that it be turned into art. But at the same time, so let's say I'm writing a poem and I've got all this stuff down, but I have not turned it into art yet. It's just a bunch of words that I put down. And I still would like it to be an art piece, which is not a judgment. It's a tasteful wish to present the best of this mind and heart to the world. And that's not a judgment. That is what we wish to do and give our best. So then comes the part where I've got all this mish of words or some idea, and they need to be rearranged and respoken and organized in such a way that it does turn into a work of art. That is not judgment.
So the aspiration to take a creative expression and to further shape it, or
Yes.
bring it to a pure expression.
That's pure art. That's a part of the art, and a necessary part of the art. Because I wouldn't share the first rendition of this piece, and the willingness to reshape it and carve it into something that at least what I feel is a work of art needs to take place. It's part of the whole doing. And it would be a judgment then if I went through all that process and then somebody said, oh, that's not a very, very good poem. I've seen you do better. And I believed that. That's a problem. If there's some kind of criticism like that comes. that's not correct. It's not correct thinking. But, you know, I feel I'm an artist. Allison's an artist here. David is an artist. He's a poet. And so Bob is an artist of food. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I know that there's polishing. It's called polishing. It's simple. Polishing the tile. We have the koan of polishing the tile. And so that's essentially what we are doing, is making the fine expression of the Buddha into a shining expression. Yeah.
So just speaking about art generally, you know, at what point do you say, okay, I've done enough reworking, whatever, it's a work of art? Where's that line that gets crossed, and what exactly is it that you want to say this is a piece of art?
If I have nothing further to do with it or to say about it, if I feel that I have polished it to where I can't do anything else, I think in a question of a poem, it's easier than in painting. And Allison will say the same thing. It's very, very difficult to know when you are finished a painting, but it's easier to know when you've finished a poem, I feel. And so you just say, yeah, I did it. It's obvious that you finished the poem. Every poem has a different ending.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So.
And I'm also sort of curious, you know, you go to, I was at the Guggenheim a few years ago, and there was a small can, and it was human excrement. And it was in the Guggenheim, and they called it art.
Sure, there are people who will do that, and you can say, I don't think that's art. And you're free to say that. I don't think that's art either. It's shitty art.
Okay, that's art.
I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like Andy Warhol, and I can not like some pieces of art, and I can disagree with it, and that's perfectly fine. That's absolutely fine, and we should be able to have that kind of feeling about our public expression. You know, somebody puts stuff up on the wall and say, no, that's not for me. Pretty simple. You don't have to like everything.
Yeah, but you're right. But it's when some of these artists are getting paid.
That's a whole other world.
I know, but it skews everything. You know?
Sure it does. Yeah. But that's a world of finance.
Okay.
And we're not even engaging there in that world. We're talking about, there are more artists, we don't know who they are, than those that we know who they are. For me, the true artist is somebody who lives her or his life continuing to express in an artistic way without ever being discovered. You know, because it's what you do and you love it. That's true artist.
Just to comment, I don't know if I have this right, but someone was talking about, or no, I think it was James Joyce. He was talking about art, and he said that there's this aesthetic arrest when you view a work of art.
Yeah.
And I took that to mean that you see something and it communicates to you on such a deep level that there are no words to describe it, but you know it's something profound. Correct. I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's so that we don't have anything to say. I have never seen Guernica. Have any of you been to Spain to see Guernica? Okay.
Yeah.
What could you say?
Yeah. It's pretty.
All you can do is be in awe of such a work. Or the other in Holland, in the Netherlands, the night, what do they call it? The night watch, thank you. Oh, I mean, you can't say anything. It just gets, your blood is just sizzling with the awe of it. And so imagine a world without art. We can't imagine such a thing. Can't imagine a world without art. And Joyce was very, I'm a student of James Joyce. So Joyce was very strong in the aesthetics of his writing. There's no doubt about it. And his work is the epitome, to me. I think he's the greatest novelist we've had. And so every writer after James Joyce has been influenced by James Joyce because his writing was so supreme in its beauty. And so, so I went to Zurich because my daughter was in Zurich and I was visiting for the first time. And, you know, Joyce lived in Zurich. It's where he started writing Ulysses. And when I got into her apartment, they lived on the top floor of this apartment building. And they had a book in their library in the room that I was staying in, and it was about James Joyce in Zurich. And I hadn't known the addresses of where he had lived. So I opened it and I was reading, and it turned out that he was in the apartment right across, a little bit in this direction. And I could look in the window of the apartment of where he had been living. And of course, I was just in awe of this. I was just so struck by it. It's in that apartment where he looked across the street and he looked in the window and he saw a woman flushing a toilet and he fell in love with her. And he started following her around Zurich, and she got spooked by this, you know, because James Joyce was very Freudian, shall I just say it that way. And at the same time, in the apartment that he was living in, the man who was living in another section of the apartment had to go through their living room to get to his apartment. And he was an opera singer. So he would be singing all hours, rehearsing his voice all hours of the night. And Joyce fancied himself a tenor. He had a beautiful voice, actually, James Joyce. And so he took up singing with this opera singer, which drove his wife absolutely crazy, that this would go on all hours of the night, this singing. And I mean, ultimately, Molly insisted that they move away from that apartment because she couldn't stand it anymore. But anyway, all of that to tell you that I decided to visit his grave, which is in Zurich. And so I got the tram downtown and transferred. It's my first time in Zurich. And my daughter said, you got to go out on your own. You've got to do the city by yourself. Time to, you know, do it. So I found my way to the cemetery, found my way wandering around, and some grave diggers pointed to the direction where he was. And there was this full statue of Joyce, full-bodied statue, sitting like this, his hat on, back on his head, a kind of a fedora, and a cigarette in hand, just sitting like this. And it was just right on the edge of the gravesite. And so there was a park bench opposite his grave. And so I sat in it and thought about James Joyce a lot in my studies and so forth. And I thought, goodness, what would it be if he sat next? What would I say to the man? What would I possibly say to James Joyce if I ran into him in Zurich and so forth? And as I was doing, I was sitting like this and my hands were open like this as I was thinking that. And I was so deeply saying, what would I say to James Joyce? And what would he say to me? And at that moment, a drop of dew came out from the bushes right above and fell exactly into the palm of my hand. Well, I mean, what would you make of that? I was visited by James Joyce. Of course I was. Never forget that moment. I was absolutely in awe. And I thought, okay, we're good together. We're all right. So this question of aesthetics does come up in the situation of the poem. And if one has studied and language and poetry and all of these things, then you know what you want your poem to be. And you're going to hold out until you're satisfied with it. And then you know, and that's all I can say. And it's the same with the painting. Allison will tell you, you know when it's finished. Or, well, you hope
Pretty
you know.
much. I hope I know.
Yeah.
I know when I've overdone it. I know it when I've ruined it, or not, you can't really ruin it. I just learned that. But you know when you've gone too far.
Sure, but when you go too far, you can never get the painting back to that original
cannot.
place
That
where it
painting
was
is gone.
spectacular. It's
Yes.
gone, and now you have to create another painting with that, and you know what you've done. You know, and one of the difficulties I think that we have if you write on computer and you edit on computer, you don't always have all of those copies of what the language that you did before. And sometimes you don't get those words back again. So just like in the painting, you don't get that original moment again. It doesn't come. So it's a hard life. Art is a hard life. So, but we are talking about simple expression. Do you keep a journal, for instance? A simple thing like that to simply say what you are feeling and what you are going through and how to work out some things. And a journal is a work of art too. I recently started a scrapbook just for these pieces of things that I always wanted to keep that get cluttered on the table. And so I have them in my scrapbook, and it's lovely to just look through and remember some things. And a scrapbook is a work of art. There's you can turn anything into art. And so I just encourage that sense of expression that is about your own life and the life of those with whom you share it. Yes, Brian.
This is Brian again. So we're getting back to the ox herding pictures and the work that we're undertaking, the Sesshin. Where along that spectrum of just like playful exploration through an artistic outcome are you encouraging us to
I'm
explore?
expecting you to play.
Yeah.
You should play. You play your heart out and make it look nice. And then, play it out and then say, okay, I'm going to go for that. And then you go for whatever that is, and then you do your best. That's all. Nothing more than that. Because it's that engaging in it that is what we're after. Not the critique, not the judgment about it, or anything like that. It's the playfulness. And that's one of the reasons that I like giving you those Walt Disney pages for your workbook.
Mhm.
It reminds you that we're doing kindergarten, we're doing play work, we're playing. And, we take ourselves way too seriously. We take sometimes practice too seriously, and we should take it just seriously enough. Just enough. Anything else? Anybody? Any other questions? Okay. All right. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassed, I vow to become his.